Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.
Now, Bowe Bergdahl, he's the American prisoner of war. He was released by the Taliban in Afghanistan in exchange for 5 detainees who were held at Guantanamo Bay. This is an interesting story. So to help dissect it, here's the Balls Radio US correspondent, Richard Kazimer. Richard, I mean, his return and the circumstances around his disappearance, this is a big story over there, isn't it? The news media are all over it.
They are, not always in a good way. It was revealed this week by a very unapologetic President Obama that Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl had been released after 5 years of captivity in Afghanistan. He was being held by Taliban forces. Bergdahl was exchanged for 5 senior Taliban officials who were also detained for many years at the U.S. military detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Now, the exchange was not made public prior to Washington's politicians finding out about it either, as well as the general public. Until the release took place, there was fear that Bergdahl would have been killed by the captors. The call by the White House was made after a proof-of-life video was showing that Bergdahl was near death from the years of abuse from his captors. Now, Bergdahl remains in a U.S. military hospital in Germany. He has not officially spoken to anyone since his release. It's unclear when he will be returned to the United States to be with his family. So he is in confinement. He is not under any sort of house arrest. The rumors that he is under some sort of court-martial and he has been AOL or anything like that is just pure speculation and pure hokum on the part of the media.
The more you drill down on this, though, this is a story on so many levels, and you touched on some of them there. So let's have a look at some of those. First of all, was it a legal decision made by the president? As you say, it was sort of sprung on everybody, perhaps for good reasons. But some people are saying, well, this wasn't a legal move by the president.
Well, he is wrapping up the end of the longest war in U.S. history, the war in Afghanistan, which was never declared a war legally by President George W. Bush. We went into Afghanistan based on some false information because of the Taliban and Osama bin Laden. All of the 9/11 hijackers, the terrorists, were from Saudi Arabia, not Afghanistan. So we went into Afghanistan anyway. So it's
got the wrong country. Damn it.
Yeah. It's never been declared a war. So Bergdahl cannot face any sort of treasonous court-martials, whether it's life in prison or the death sentence for war crimes, because this is not an official war. That having been said, the president can pretty much do whatever he wants to get soldiers back into this country. This is a code of honor. This is a military code that you never leave anyone behind. And for the right-wing chicken hawks now, including John McCain, who was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, to now be saying that he would never have traded these, that Bergdahl should have stayed there, is just the most vehement hatred, disrespect for American soldiers that you can imagine. And that's what's going on here, not only on the right, but also with the right-wing media. Some of the stuff that's being thrown out there against Bergdahl, against the president, against Bergdahl's parents, especially his father, for growing a beard during his son's 5-year captivity to mark the time. One Fox presenter on a morning show said that Bergdahl's father looked like a Taliban and was a Taliban sympathizer and asked if the dad had run out of razors. That's how sick the xenophobic anti-Muslim hatred is.
Yeah, well, you've got a
beard.
Must be with the Taliban. The other aspect of this, of course, is on the one side, it's fine to say that we never leave anyone behind. On the other side, do you negotiate with terrorists? Were they negotiating with terrorists? Is the Taliban the same as Al Qaeda? Who were these 5 people who were released? Do we know answers to any of those questions?
Well, you can split hairs and then go back to the Iran-Contra deals during the Reagan administration, where, yes, we did negotiate with terrorists and people who were holding hostages. So, yes, there is a precedence here by U.S. presidents and by a Republican president in the form of Ronald Reagan. So, yes, we have But again, this goes back to you don't leave a soldier behind. If this is what it takes to return this gentleman to his family and to his country, then you do it. You do what needs to be done. Now, on the other side of that is that the 5 gentlemen who were released, they are not going back to Afghanistan. They are going to Qatar. This is where they will remain on the conditions of the release. These gentlemen are not going to have the life of Riley over there. They have to follow the conditions of the release, which means they're not allowed to associate with suspected terrorists, nor are they to use the detention that they suffered for the past, I don't know how many years, as propaganda for Taliban causes. I also want to point out, Phil, too, that of the 600 detainees at Gitmo that have been released, only 9 to 17% of those detainees have returned to terrorist activities. So that's a small percentage, depending on who you talk to. I think getting this gentleman back to his homeland and to his family is certainly worth it.
And those 5 people, I've heard mixed reports about how important they were to the Taliban. I mean, from whether they were senior ranking officials to whether actually they were nothing more than goat herds, really, who, fell into the wrong place at the wrong time. But so, as you say, they're going to be in Qatar. I mean, they're going to have, they'll get to see the World Cup if it's held there, if they've got the stadiums finished in 4 years' time. So life's looking good for them. But they were never charged. That's the interesting thing, isn't it? This is what I find really strange. Here are 5 high-level Taliban members, supposedly, and yet they couldn't lay charges against them.
No, because what we can do over here and what has been done under the Bush administration and continued under the Obama administration is that you do pretty much whatever the hell you want to whomever the hell you want, whether it's detaining them at Gitmo or killing them with drones. It's all in the name of war, again, which was never officially declared.
Interesting article in Rolling Stone magazine about Bowe Bergdahl. I don't know if you've read this one from a few years ago, called America's Last Prisoner of War. Supposedly with some of the letters that were exchanged before he disappeared with his parents. His dad sounds like an interesting character, actually. I mean, they were virtually penniless. He was homeschooled, and he sort of sprung it on his parents that he decided he wanted to become a soldier. But then over time, he got more and more disillusioned about America's role in this war. He said, here's one of his emails, and I'll read some more later on in the program, but these people need help. What they get is the most conceited country in the world, telling them that they are nothing and that they are stupid and they have no idea how to live. Another one, he says, the horror that is America is disgusting. He obviously, if these are genuine, no reason to believe that they weren't, because I haven't seen anybody saying that this article is wrong since, and this was a few years ago. But if these are real, he was not happy with America's role in that war.
As are not a lot of young soldiers from America who go over there and cannot understand what their role is. I believe he was 22 years old when he went over there. But he, like a lot of these soldiers that don't end up shooting themselves or other soldiers, that he did get a sense of disillusionment and perhaps even wanderlust. There were some quotes from some of his fellow soldiers that he would look out into the distance and say, I wonder if I could walk to China from here. I wonder if I can walk to India from here. So we don't know. And again, I cannot stress enough that there is no information that is coming from Bowe Bergdahl or the Army or the State Department yet since he has been released. So everything that's out there is speculation from the people that he served with, speculation of people that have followed this case for some time, and just filtering through the little tidbits of information. But until we hear from Bowe Bergdahl, I think we should all reserve some comment and judgment until then.
Yeah. But I mean, either way, even if he did go, and we'll have to move on because we've spoken about this for a while, but it is a fascinating subject. But even if he did go AWOL, I mean, that doesn't. I mean, I don't know. It's sort of like it's like the worst, seen as being the worst crime ever. But if you are in an unjustified war and you've got a conscience, I don't know. It's not black and white, is it, to say that it's that you've done the wrong thing? I mean, the wrong thing was for America to be involved in that war in the first place, or to create that war in the first place. And
agreed.
the atrocities of that of your previous government are still haunting us. Now, let's move on. A 30% cut in emissions by power plants by 2030. A 30% cut. That's the proposal from the Environmental Protection Agency. It's great to see that that they want to do things about climate change. We've forgotten all about it here, but 30% target by 2030. How are they going to do this?
It's funny because an hour after we finished our Balls Radio segment last week, we were talking about 10 U.S. states enacting their own emissions cap standards, during which I mentioned that President Obama has not tried to pass the climate change measures, knowing full well that the Republican-held Congress would not pass anything. So what he did was he did an end run around the House approval simply by having the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, exercise its legal authority to impose strict emission standards on all states. Now, standards that the Supreme Court ruled back in 2007 that the Clean Air Act was the law of the land. Now, the emission standards are going to target, for the most part, electric power plants because they derive their power mostly from coal, about 28 to 30%, and that makes up a good portion of greenhouse gas emissions. So what you can imagine is that the coal-producing states, they're just crying foul. They're going nuts. They're claiming the measures are job killers, and they're fighting back to block the regulations. Now, missing from the opposition is that all of the jobs that will be created in the wind and solar energy production industry using the same workers that we've been sending down is 600, 800, 1,000 feet under the ground to dig dirty, filthy rocks we can burn. So there's a plus side to this. How the EPA is going to do it, again, as I said last week, I'm not a technical genius by any stretch, but what they're going to do is they're just going to impose, whether you use scrubbers or you're going to start to get out of using coal to generate power. That is what they're looking for. And again, all the other standards aside, auto emissions, things like that, we're doing anyway. But they're looking at those coal-fired plants to begin with to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What they're saying is, if you're going to make electricity, use another method, and you've got X amount of years to do it.
But this isn't law yet, is it? This is a proposal, and it's got to be discussed, and then after it's discussed, the states will have another year or so to present a plan. So we're getting quite a way towards 2030 before this actually, not really, but we're getting a couple of years closer to it before this starts to act.
To the letter of the law, yes, it is, because it is part of the Clean Air Act. And as I mentioned, it is the Supreme Court ruled that if those emissions create a health hazard, then you have to reduce the emissions. So what the states who are opposed to this are going to do is to use the technicality of the law to fight it. But it is a law that the Clean Air Act imposed way before 2007. It was challenged in 2007 in the Supreme Court, and they ruled that, in fact, it is the law. There was a great episode. Remember the show, the series, The West Wing, that was shown over here in the United States? There was an episode where President Bartlett was in a turmoil about trying to save some land that was going to fall into private hands. At the end of the episode, he finally uses the Antiquities Act to designate this parcel of land as an antiquity of the United States. And this is kind of like what's going on in real life here, is that they're using a portion of the Clean Air Act that was not heretofore used or actually known about. And, I guess you got to give credit to President Obama and the EPA that said, this is how we're going to do it. Right. It's on the books, and we're going to impose it.
Well, at least they're doing something. So, and Heather Zikal, who's the White House's chief climate advisor, told Fairfax Media, this has been reported over here in the last week, that she thinks everyone except climate deniers is deeply concerned with the direction Australia is going. So this is an interesting thing that America, which is certainly more progressive now in terms of, and who would have thought, more progressive in terms of tackling climate change than Australia is, could actually become a bit of a stumbling block between the US and Australia. I know, in the States, everyone will go, who cares? Where's Australia? Never heard of the place. But it's very important to Australia that we have good relations with the United States, obviously. And it would be interesting if attitudes towards climate change became a big differentiator between our two administrations, and it sounds like that could be bubbling under as an issue.
Well, what you'll sees in not only Australia, but with China too, who is the second largest polluter in the world. I think, it's between America and China. But countries like Australia with a history of global climate change denying stupidity does have its consequences, Phil. The U.S. is planning trade sanctions against any country that is not going to make an effort to scale back the carbon dioxide emissions. So you may have money to burn, but some of us can't stand the smoke, brother.
Yeah, I know. And we've also got lots of coal to burn, and that, of course, is a large part of the self-interest locally. It's like, well, we export lots of coal. We don't send people down mines. We just blast away huge areas. So, we not only are we creating coal, but we're also creating these big poxes over our scenery as well, which with open cast mining, which is the most common form here. Now we of course have a huge problem with migration in Australia. It's a huge problem here. You've probably heard about it. I mean, it must be all over the world how big the migration problem is. Unless, of course, you look at the facts, which always tells a different story. But if you listen to talkback radio and read the tabloids, then you know what a huge problem migration is here. But let's have a look at the United States for real migration issues. People, of course, have been flooding over the border from Mexico for years. But sadly, it seems many of them are young children on their own. And over there, it seems they don't lock them up. They drop them off at a bus station and say, go and find your Ellies.
Stop me if this sounds familiar. The U.S. Border Patrols have been so overwhelmed by the influx of more than 48,000 children that have entered this country illegally.
Amazing.
From the deplorable political, economic, and social conditions in countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, that they begun flying them into the state of Arizona to be holed up at a holding center, which in itself has now become deplorable for these kids. Now, for the most part, the adult immigrants, they're arriving in Texas, which borders Mexico, then flown to Arizona, which also borders Mexico, and they're required to report to customs officials within 15 days. Get this, Phil. These people are rounded up. The illegal immigrants are rounded up, flown to Arizona, and then released on the tarmac and told, by the way, you got to report to this place in 15 days. See ya. Well, the kids, however, a lot of them are traveling on their own. They have no parents. They're coming here as refugees. They are now relocated to a warehouse in Arizona for their own safety until they can all be processed. Now, it didn't take long for that facility in Arizona to reach capacity. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, who has zero sympathy for illegal immigrants, she's called on federal help to supply beds and clothing and food for these kids. Again, another irony, because considering Brewer is a staunch opponent of government intervention and a vehement opponent of Obamacare. So I wonder if she wants to eat some more crow. Once these kids are examined and vaccinated, they're now going to be sent to other facilities in Texas, California, and Oklahoma. They will then fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health and Human Services, and they will either be reunited with their own families in this country if they can be found, or they're going to find willing homes. And as a country, we do not turn away children.
Right. So the kids aren't being dropped off at the bus station. It's in Arizona. It's the grown-ups who are doing that. They're not callous enough to drop kids, which is what I'd read somewhere, that it was the kids that were being left at the bus station and said, yeah, go and find your Ellies, which would have been horrendous.
No, they're not. They are being protected. It's just that we're seeing so many children now that are unaccompanied by adults that are coming into this country that it says a lot of what's going on in these South and Central American countries, the deplorable conditions politically and economically that we're now getting those children, the refugees. And it's deplorable, but we'll open our arms.
Yeah, as far as you can. I mean, it's just a problem of the world today, isn't it? I mean, it's not just that part of the world as well. Obviously, the Middle East is creating its own problems as well, and yeah, how do you cope long term? I don't know. No one has the answer to this issue. It's gonna go on forever and ever. Anyway, as you say, we do what we can in the meantime. Now, Hershey bars. Hey, we go, at least maybe they're coming to America for the Hershey bars, or maybe some of the grown-ups are reading this story. I mean, Hershey bars are as American as apple pie or shooting each other on a weekend. But it's been packed. The interesting thing about Hershey bars is it's one of those brands that never really advertises. I mean, do they advertise at all? I mean, I know they never used to advertise.
Yes, they do. Yeah. Hershey Kisses, especially. The Hershey Kisses does a lot of advertising during holidays, Valentine's, things like that. Not so much the Hershey bar. We don't see a lot of candy bar commercials payday, things like that occasionally, but mainly because they do so well on their own that they don't have to. And also because it's junk food and they don't want to be, pushing that stuff. So it's a kind of a catch-22. We want to advertise and we want to keep our brand name out there, but we are 100% sugar, so do we want to do it? But it's a good quality product. Yeah. Hershey bars have been around forever.
They have, and and Americans overseas, like my late father-in-law, used to love them. And whenever you saw them in shops over here, always wanted to grab his Hershey bar, and you can get them all over the world. And the packaging has stayed the same, and pretty much the same anyway, for a long time. But now they're suing a company that's taking that look and applying it to a completely different sensorial experience.
This is going to be one of those, dude, what? moments. As you say, candy icon Hershey, it's suing a small Colorado candy maker for copyright infringement. Hershey's claiming the company's marijuana-laced confections, their labeling is just a tad too close to Hershey's family-friendly and the go-to munchie candy that it's been known for 100 years or so. The company that they're suing is called Tincture Bell, LLC. And the creation's Hashies looks a lot like the packaging on Reese's peanut butter cups, one of my favorites. Ganja Joy looks like the Almond Joy that Peter Paul, which is a subsidiary of Hershey, sells. Hash Heath, which is part of Heath Bar, and Dabby Patty, which is also a peppermint patty, York peppermint patty. So the labels are all look the same, but it's full of marijuana. So even if you're stoned and you look at that stuff, you can tell that it's taken right from the Hershey products. Hershey's asking that all the parody candy be removed from Colorado marijuana dispensaries. Understand that Colorado has legalized marijuana. And they're also looking for compensatory and punitive damages. And I wonder, Phil, how much weed has to be sold to pay for these legal fees.
Yeah. Well, again, now it's legal. Of course, it'll be worth much less. So a lot more of it. So people will be going, look, I knew Hershey tasted good, but I didn't realize it tasted this good. Maybe Hershey will have to get onto it as well. Maybe this is a new direction for them.
Well, don't forget that Hershey, Pennsylvania was also where 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant was. I don't know. Maybe that explains the shelf life of Hershey bars. I think it's right. 250,000 years. No, it still tastes good.
That's right. Comes with its own half-life. Good to talk, as always. Richard Kazimer in the United States. See you next week.
All right, my friend. Take care.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.